Last video, someone left a comment and asked, how did you get to Austria? Why are you studying here? And I thought, that's a really good question because I've never actually answered that in a video. And so this video is going to be a bit of that story. And I thought I'd tell it because it would be a story that I would really want to hear. If there was someone who, if I didn't know that it was a thing that you could travel to another country halfway across the world and just start studying in a place that you've never been to, where you know no one and where you don't speak the language. If I didn't know that was a thing and I saw someone who was like, you can actually just do that if you want to, I think that would be really eye-opening for me. And so the story starts back maybe a couple months ago with this bright, young, talented Australian boy. Maybe young, maybe not bright or talented. This Australian boy studying music in Australia, in Western Australia specifically, which makes a difference because this is a little geography rundown of Australia. Australia, right? Most of the population of Australia live on the east side, near New Zealand, right? That side of the coast. And I live all the way on the other side in the capital of Western Australia, which is, in musical terms, Western classical musical terms, the absolute middle of nowhere, basically. It's nowhere near Europe. It's nowhere near any other major city. No major musicians, major orchestras tour or travel here. Even there have been so many occasions when I've been so excited to go see that Heidelberg is on tour, or Vengerov was on tour, or James Ennis, they were all on tour. Australia and New Zealand tour. And I would look at the concert dates and see Vengerov, Sibelius Concerto, and then a whole Vengerov recital in Sydney, or in Melbourne, or in Auckland, New Zealand. Basically, same country, but maybe 4,000 kilometers away. And I would see the same with James Ennis. I would see the same with Heidelberg. Luckily, the best we got Clara Jumi Kang, which was pretty good. She was very, very impressive when she came and played the Brahms Concerto. That was another story because there was no parking for that concert and I almost basically missed the entire Brahms Concerto that I've been waiting months to see. But the point is that it is basically the middle of nowhere, Perth. And so none of these musicians, none of the people came here, and it's very hard to get the education you need in order to become the violinist I wanted to become. This is nothing against any of the people there, any of the teachers there, any of the members of the orchestra. They're all lovely, very, very nice people. But it's just the fact that it's so far away from anything else. It makes it so difficult to actually get the education and sort of make a name for yourself, begin to make a name for yourself. And so when I found out that there was this masterclass on, there was this poster at the university and it said masterclass by this teacher. And I had no clue who he was. Absolutely no clue. Never heard of him, never seen him, didn't know anything about him, right? And so I thought, whatever, doesn't matter. But one of my friends played in the masterclass because they sent around emails, because obviously no one was reading the posters. They sent around emails to everyone saying, we need someone to play in this masterclass. Like, who wants to play? Who has a chamber group together? And I didn't have anyone. I didn't have anyone that I had a quartet ready to play. But one of my friends did. And so he went instead. I didn't go. And it ended up being on a weekend. It was on like a Saturday afternoon or something. And there were no classes. I'd done enough practice. Well, maybe. And so I just went along to the masterclass just to see. It was open, free, didn't have to pay. I went along, I just basically sat somewhere in the middle and watched this teacher who I'd never heard of, never seen, give this masterclass. And I remember someone came along and played Brahms Sonata, the first, this one. Oh. Which is a lovely piece. It starts great piece with piano. And anyway, she played that. And then this guy got up and gave some feedback, you know, he had some interesting things to say, things that no one else was really saying at that time to other students around me. And then someone else, another quartet played Borodin, second quartet, D major quartet. I forget how that goes, but you would know it, you would recognize it. And then my friend he played Hummel trio, because we love Hummel. Hummel is, now that I'm in Austria, I listen to more and more Hummel. And every time I listen back to Hummel, what a good composer. If you're not already listening to Hummel, you got to go listen to some Hummel. The E flat or F minor piano sonata. Top pieces. Anyway, Hummel aside, he plays, and then, you know, the teacher gives some more feedback, some really interesting things. He talks about, I remember he had this really good way of working on dynamics in a quartet, where he was sort of saying that there's not enough dynamic contrast. You can't tell the difference between the pianos, the fortes, the real loud and the real soft of the piece. And so what he said was, okay, play pianissimo, like the first chord of the piece. Play pianissimo. And so they played pianissimo. And then he said, okay, now play piano. And so they play louder, right? They play louder, they play piano. And then he said, okay, mezzo piano. And then they played louder again. Then he said mezzo forte. They played louder again. Then he said play forte now. They played louder again. And then he said fortissimo. And by the time they played fortissimo, that was 3 times louder than they played anything in that piece. And I thought, that's such an interesting little data set or piece of information, idea that you can use and work into basic. I should make an apology for the cut in the video, and I will pick the story up right where I left off. But basically what happened just then was that I ran out of storage when I was filming this, and I only realized as I was about to go and upload it. So I left up with the part where I just had the masterclass with this teacher, and he, you know, said some insightful, interesting things. And so basically right after the masterclass is over, I went straight up to the teacher, walked straight down onto the stage and said, listen, I don't really know you, but like, do you teach anyone? Are you available to have some lessons with over the next couple weeks? And he said, sure. And so I took down, he gave me his phone number, I sent him a message, and then I had a lesson in a couple days or the next week. And I went and I played for him, I think I played Bach, and I think I played Sarasate. I had Spanish dances. That one, Malagueña. Yeah, with the pits. I'm shocked that I still remember that, but that's what I played for him. And he did like the playing, but that wasn't really the part that was the main value he saw in me, I guess, as a prospective student, as someone to come all the way over here. The main value he saw was not that my playing was perfect, not that, you know, I was the most naturally talented, you know, prodigious virtuoso of all time, but that I could seem to be able to pick things up at a reasonable speed, higher than average speed, in that meaning that I would play something and maybe it wouldn't be perfect, but when he said change this or do this differently, after only a few tries or so, I could usually get most of the things he was saying. And so I think he saw that as a positive, as a point to make him more enthusiastic about me as a student. And along with that, another enthusiastic point is this point of a drive, a sense of sort of motivation in a student. That was me. That tells you that they're willing to do what it takes, I suppose, willing to do what it takes and willing to follow through with the advice. Because a lot of people in sort of mentorship positions or positions where they're, lots of people often ask them for advice, these people tend to find it much more enjoyable, much more rewarding to give that advice to someone who they know is going to use it. If someone comes up and they have an air of, like, they sort of just want to get to you because you're more famous or more well-known or more well-renowned, or they have an air of just looking for one secret hack or tip that's going to change everything, those people aren't so satisfying to teach, and they usually don't end up yielding the best results as students or mentees, I suppose. And so it's much more rewarding to teach the person who you know, when you give them this, they're actually going to work really hard with that thing. They're going to try to do extra things on top of that. They're going to try to take the most advantage of everything you have to tell them and really use it to get to their potential. So I think that was an incentive. And so after we had a few lessons, he goes, Shem, why don't you come to Austria? And I was like, sure, I'll come to Austria. Why not? Just, out of the blue, random, nowhere. And then so we had a few more lessons, and he had been staying in Western Australia for a couple months before, but I only gotten to meet him on the last month that he was there. So I only had lessons with him for a week or two. And on the last lesson, he gives me the phone number of this guy who's living here, who's my roommate in the room, just right there. He gives me the name of this guy, and he goes, okay, send him a message and see if he has a room available to come and stay in Austria. And so I sent him a message, and my roommate told me this afterwards, but the first thing he did upon receiving that message from this random guy asking to stay at his house in Austria, the first thing he did was call the teacher, because obviously he knew the teacher as well from being in Austria. And so he called the teacher and was like, so why is this random guy messaging me to come stay in my apartment? And so the teacher had to explain that, all about me and who I was, that I was a real person, not just some random guy. Because you can imagine that. Imagine you're just going about your day, and the next notification, the next time you check your phone, is like this random guy explaining he's like from the city that you're from, and he'd really like to come stay in your apartment because the teacher said he should. That just would be such a bizarre text to receive. Anyway, that's what happened. So the situation got explained. Then I had to deal with some, discussions with the university and arguments with parents and whatnot. But eventually the decision was that I was going to go to Austria. And I think it was a good decision. I mean, it was in some ways it was a difficult decision to make, to leave everything behind, leave the whole degree that I had there, leave, of course, the friends, the family for a time, and go as far as Austria and go somewhere where I didn't know anyone there. I didn't know the people there. I didn't have any connections. I didn't know the language. I didn't know where I was going to buy my food. I didn't know how I was going to get around. I didn't know the laws. And to just get up and go, I mean, in some ways it's quite the decision to make on the fly like that. But I think what's important is that I did make the decision, and there was actually, despite how it looks, there was somewhat of a thought process behind that. And that was the idea that you can never really plan for anything. You can never plan out all the possibilities of what if this goes wrong, or what if I hop on this wrong train stop, or what if this shop is closed one day and I can't get food, or what if what if I have to pay for the water bill or something. All of these nonsensical things. Will there be bed sheets there? Do they have a washing machine? All of these sorts of things are the sorts of things that you have to sort of just say, okay, I can't deal with that. It can't be a thing that I'm dealing with right now, because there will be an infinite amount of those things. You can never account for every single little contingency that you have when you plan something as big as this. And so the thinking I had behind it was much more, let's try, what's the minimum viable way that I can get to Austria and just see what it's like. And that minimum viable way was to stay in this room. The reason why I got that contact was because we're in Carinthia in Austria, which is the southern state of Austria. And so it borders Italy and Slovenia. And as a result, there are a lot of Slovenian students who study here. And so the guy who was staying in this room was Slovenian, and because it was over the summer break, he wasn't in the room. He wasn't using it. He was back living in Slovenia for the summer. And so the room was free. That's why I could take this room. And I was like, if I went any other time, I would have to pay for a whole, the accommodation, and I wouldn't be able to stay with at least my roommate who at least knew, who I was and sort of could show me around a bit. And that made me think, like, there will be no better time. So I took the opportunity, got on a plane, and now I'm here. Then once I got here, I had to learn how everything works. I had to do a summer course, and then I had to practice a lot to prepare for an audition for this university, because that was sort of the ticket to stay here, because I couldn't stay in the country if I didn't have the visa, right? Because for Australians, you can stay for 90 days as a tourist. And so my 90 days would have been up by now, and I would be back home. But I got in, luckily clutched up, and now I can stay here for as long as I want. So that's basically the complete story of how I got from Australia to studying in Austria. And who knows, maybe I'll be studying somewhere else this time next year. I feel like being too committed can be a little dangerous in your study. A bit of the, they call sunk cost fallacy, basically. The idea that you keep committing to something you've already committed to, even when it's going bad. Not that this is going bad at all, but I'm always open to see new things in new places. And I think that's very advisable for lots of other, aspiring violinists, musicians, or anything in life, really. Although maybe we're getting a bit too broad. We should stay back to the music. So I'm going to go practice some Kreutzer, and then there's a concert of Brazilian music tonight, so I'm going to go watch that. See you guys later.